Today we are pleased to introduce Stu Levitan as part of the Wisconsin Historical Museum's History Sandwiched In lecture series. The opinions expressed today are those of the presenters and are not necessarily those of the Wisconsin Historical Society or the museum's employees. Stu Levitan is an award-winning print and broadcast journalist and a mainstay of Madison media in government since 1975. He is the author of Madison in the 60s and Madison, the Illustrated Sesquicentennial History Volume 1. He has written extensively on politics, culture, and Madison history for several publications and currently produces the Madison in the 60s podcast for Wart FM Community Radio, where he also serves as vice president of the board. He hosts Access City Hall on the Madison City Channel and previously produced the interview program Books and Beats with Stu Levitan on 92.1 The Mic. After leaving daily journalism in 1980, Stu served 5 years on the Dane County Board of Supervisors and spent 27 years as a labor mediator and arbitrator for the State Employment Relations Commission. Stu has also chaired several City of Madison commissions, including the Community Development Authority, Landmarks Commission, and Plan Commission. This fall, he will present a course on urban renewal and civil rights in the 60s through the UW Division of Continuing Studies. Here today to discuss Madison in 1969, please join me in welcoming Stu Levitan.
Excuse me, thank you, Ellen. It is, of course, a great pleasure and honor to come back to History Sandwiched In, and especially to do so on behalf of the Wisconsin Historical Society Press. My thanks to the Historical Museum for hosting, and of course to the Historical Society Archives, Library, and Foundation, without whom, all of whom were essential to the writing and publication of Madison in the 60s. My talk today is in the following parts. First, we will mark the golden anniversary of the three big stories from 1969, student anti-war protest, the Mifflin Street Block Party riot, and the Black Studies strike. Then we'll step back and look at the big picture with an overview of the 5 distinct issues, some of them unique to this place and time, that really dominated the decade. Some are gone, some remain. And I've left some time for questions and comments. And as it happens, I am celebrating an anniversary today too. It was on this day 44 years ago that Dave Zwiefel offered me the job as the Washington correspondent for the Capital Times, which is what indirectly brings us here today. Madison, 1969, a tick over 171,000 people live here. Several things which would define the 70s and 80s and beyond begin in 1969. The Mifflin Street Community Co-op opens. The Madison Tenant Union organizes and has its first rent strike. Names in the political news include Republican Attorney Bill Dyke, who defeats Democratic Attorney Toby Reynolds for mayor. Eugene Parks is elected Madison's first African-American alderman, and Mrs. Ruth Doyle becomes Madison's first female president of the school board. This is State Street, west of Lake, in the summer of 1969. Planners want to turn the last 4 blocks into a full pedestrian mall, but the business owners are protesting. While the city considers closing a small street, it opens a large road. Campus Drive, a freeway between Babcock Drive and Farley Avenue, opens in November, taking 15,000 cars a day off Old University Avenue. And a few days later, the new athletic director, Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch, fires the failed football coach John Cota, whose teams had won just 3 games out of 30 in his 3 years. But Hirsch has some sympathy for Cota, and he tells reporters that student unrest has made it difficult to recruit football players, quote, because their parents don't want to send their sons into a situation such as we had here. And the situation such as we had here in 1969 was pretty bad, and it was getting worse. As the war in Vietnam escalates and continues and anti-war protests grow, some activists edge into violence, and city, state, and university officials step up their crackdown. It's a vicious cycle of protest, rejection, resistance, repression, leading to 7 new laws this year alone dealing with protesters. And the city gets in the act, empowering the mayor to impose a street clearing curfew and to call out auxiliary troops. We are in a period of unlawful conduct bordering on outright rebellion and anarchy, Police Chief Wilbur Emery tells graduating cadets. and the courts are, quote, building legal curtains around the criminal while restricting the police officer. This is the police chief of Madison, Wisconsin, hired by the Police and Fire Commission, appointed by the liberal mayor Ivan Nestingen, criticizing the Warren Court and the Miranda decision. Former Secretary of State Dean Rusk gives a talk at the Memorial Union in late August. It's 8 months since he left office, and there are no uniformed police on the scene. So when a crowd of about 150, led by members of the Young Socialist Alliance, heave rocks at his car as he is driving away, pound on other cars, and partially block traffic, there are no arrests. A few weeks later, Madison Police Inspector Herman Thomas tells an interagency meeting at the governor's residence that Mifflin Street radicals are gathering machine guns and grenades, and the consensus is to expect bloodshed, probably a death, on campus this year. Third week of September, there's a training exercise at the National Guard Armory on Wright Street. 2:45 in the morning, a bomb, about 20 sticks of dynamite with a timing device, explodes, doing $15,000 in damage to the armory and the training equipment. It's about an hour after a similar explosion damages the federal building in downtown Milwaukee. October 15th is Moratorium Day. 15,000 fill the field house for a series of speeches against the war in Vietnam. It is the largest crowd in the field house since a JFK campaign appearance in October 1960. And after the speeches, almost the entire crowd marches to the Capitol through the cold rain, filling State Street with flickering candles and shimmering umbrellas from mall to square. At the Capitol, all falls to a hush, but for the tolling of the bell of Grace Episcopal Church, for an ecumenical memorial service for the more than 900 Wisconsin servicemen who had died in the war so far. As each name is read, a candle is extinguished. The mournful ceremony ends about midnight. The war goes on. After entertaining thousands at the Dane County Memorial Coliseum on November 13th, Peter, Paul, and Mary perform another full set for free at the crushingly crowded Moratorium Midnight Vigil at the University Catholic Center on Lower State Street. At both shows, they urge fans to join the March on Washington that weekend, and many do. The next day, the regents reinstate curfew for freshman women under 21 and raise to 21 the minimum age at which students can live off campus without parental permission. The president of the Regents, Dr. James T. Nellen, team physician for the Green Bay Packers, calls it, quote, a vote against the permissiveness that is going on in universities. And as the decade closes, Governor Warren Knowles signs the year's 7th law dealing with protesters, setting a minimum 1-semester suspension from attendance or employment for anybody convicted of seizing a university building or forcefully disrupting classes or traffic. This is something that thousands of students had just done in the Black Studies strike. Now, only a few were arrested and charged, but from now on, everyone who blocks a building or blocks traffic knows that if they are arrested and convicted, they will be suspended from employment or attendance. Now, whether this would prove as great a disincentive as the state hopes remains to be seen. And it really doesn't seem so, because 3 days later, there's an SDS action against a Quonset hut that the ROTC uses for instructions, called T16. It's at the corner of Babcock Drive and Linden Drive. And it leaves 4 campus policemen injured and 4 protesters in jail. Then about 200 move through campus, smashing windows in the Army Math Research Center and Bascom Hall. A group of about 20 attacks the Peterson Administration Building, where they smash the large plate glass windows and destroy thousands of the hated photo identification cards. And if you can see, the byline on this story is Leo F. Burt. 4:15 in the morning on December 28th, Carl Armstrong, a recent UW dropout working for Gino's Restaurant and Pizzeria, breaks 3 windows in T16, tosses in 2 one-gallon jugs filled with gasoline and lights a match. The fire department saves the building, and police track Armstrong's footprints in the snow to Tripp Circle, where they lose the trail and never develop any suspects. The Badger Army Ammunition Plant in Baraboo. On December 31st, Armstrong, a Madison native from the east side, gets his brother Dwight to steal a plane from Maury Airfield, where Dwight works, to make a bombing run on this facility. About 2 hours into 1970, Carl drops 3 makeshift bombs of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, called an ANFO bomb. They fall harmlessly into the snow and do not explode. Driving back to Madison, Carl is pulled over by the police, who do not smell the kerosene on his pants and only give him a warning for speeding. This is the start of the New Year's Gang, whose number would soon come to include the aforementioned Leo Burt, who literally embodied the growing radicalism of the Daily Cardinal. The New Year's Gang will undertake a series of fire bombings and other actions, culminating in the ANFO bombing of Sterling Hall at 3:42 in the morning of August 24, 1970, in an unsuccessful attempt to damage the Army Mathematics Research Center. The explosion destroys valuable research, does about $2 million in physical damage, and kills postdoctoral physics researcher Robert Fosnacht, who has no relation to the Army Math Research Center. And there are 35 other war-related deaths in Madison this decade. 1969 brought 7 funerals, including 2-time Purple Heart recipient Corporal Charles Le Bosquet. That's down from 9 in 1967 and 68. And we have 2 22-year-old heroes among our number. Marine Sergeant David B. Thompson is awarded the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry and the Navy Commendation Medal. And Army First Lieutenant Ricky B. Brantmeyer is awarded the Bronze Star for heroism in ground combat. So that's a brief overview of the state of the anti-war protest movement in 1969. Now let's go to the Black Studies Strike. The Black Studies Strike was the most successful political protest of the decade. Students issued a series of demands and got several of them satisfied, including the most important one. At the time, when there were about 500 black students out of 35,500 on campus, the university's academic program for Black Studies consisted of 2 courses, a seminar, and a series of guest lecturers. It was not enough. Friday, February 7th, 1969, the Black People's Alliance presents the 13 demands, starting with a degree-granting program in a Black Studies department organized and controlled by black students and faculty, with students having veto power over personnel decisions. They also want to double the black enrollment and more. Then about 300 students, mostly white, march up Bascom Hill and enter classrooms in 7 buildings to explain their demands. Some professors and students are intimidated, but there are no arrests or serious incidents. A group of about 1,500 do the same thing on Monday. The Reverend Jesse Jackson is on campus Friday night for a WSA symposium on the Black Revolution, curated by the same woman, Marjorie Tabankin, who would organize the Moratorium Day speeches. Jackson tells an overflow crowd in the Great Hall that the 13 demands, quote, should be followed to the letter. And from the same stage the next afternoon, black student leader Willie Edwards tells a large crowd, quote, the only power we have is the power to disrupt. And if the 13 demands are not met, this university will not function. Afterwards, about 600 students chanting 2, 4, 6, 8, organize and smash the state, march on the field house to disrupt the basketball game with Ohio State. 150 helmeted police with riot sticks and tear gas arrive barely 5 minutes before the students do. If they had not arrived at the field house when they did, Chancellor Edwin Young tells the regents, there would have been a great deal of violence. There are scuffles at various gates, and the governor's Black Rambler is vandalized. 4 students are arrested. Most of the 11,000 basketball fans are unaware of the disturbance. The WSA calls the university a racist institution and supports the strike. The Student Senate creates a bail fund. Tuesday, a new tactic. A non-penetrable picket line standing in the schoolhouse door to shut the campus down. Some fistfights break out, but the lines generally hold and hundreds leave or are turned away. Strikers have effectively seized control of several university buildings when close to 200 city and county officers sweep up the hill and the obstructors, as they say, make like steam and vaporize. There are more blockades on Wednesday and the cops are overwhelmed, so Mayor Otto Fesky and Chancellor Young and other campus leaders asked Governor Warren Knowles to call out the National Guard, which he does, 900 at first. The guardsmen keep buildings open, but they also trigger a defensive reaction by the students, causing strike participation to increase sharply. That afternoon, close to 7,000 students, that's almost 20% of the entire student body, take to the streets under a tight control by the black marshals, and they block University Avenue for hours. Knowles activates another 1,200 guardsmen. That night, another group of about 8,000 students, this is more than 20% of the student body, hold a torchlight parade that winds through State Street and Langdon Street. It is self-policed and orderly, with only a few racist catcalling by onlookers. Things calm down on Friday, and the Guard leaves the central campus. There's a Valentine's Day march to the Capitol on February 14th. It goes to the Capitol and back and disrupts traffic, but again is disciplined and peaceful, as is another march, another torchlit march of about 1,000 that night. The strike never really gets going the second week. It is over by Tuesday, but for a brief outburst of vandalism a week later. Over the 11 days of the strike, attendance has been off by about 10% in classes on the Hill, while on the Western campus, things were pretty much normal. A few days later, a special faculty committee recommends the university establish a Black Studies department, and in early March, the full faculty endorses the idea, and on December 1st, the faculty unanimously accepts the detailed plans and academic program for a degree-granting Department of Afro-American Studies, the primary goal of the strike. And proponents hope the Regents and Coordinating Committee for Higher Education will give final approval, and the department will start in the fall of 1970. The Mifflin Street Block Party riots of May 1969. Invitation to a block party that becomes a three-night riot and an example of how history happens. The great radical leader Tom Hayden called the student neighborhood around Mifflin and Bassett Streets one of America's liberated zones. But in the angry year of 1969, it becomes a war zone. That is the Zigzag Man. He's the logo of a French company that makes rolling papers, originally for cigarettes, by now mainly for marijuana. But unlike the real logo, he is wearing a bandolier of bullets under the inscription, "Armed Love and the Command to Off the Pig." This worries Police Chief Wilbur Emery, so he schedules extra men and coordinates with Sheriff Jack Leslie for 100 or so Dane County deputies to be in reserve. He does not bother to consult with Mayor Bill Dyke, who has only been in office for 2 weeks. Detective Tom McCarthy, whose face was fractured by a brick at the Dow protest in 1967, is looking forward to the weekend. "We're going to bring the war to Mifflin Street," he vows. Now, the hippies and the heavies and the hangers-on of Mifflin Street don't really care that they don't have a permit to block the street. Many neighborhoods throw block parties without a permit. There was just a block party a week before on Gilman Street, no permit, and the police actually diverted traffic. That's not going to happen today. Mid-afternoon on Saturday, May 3rd, groups are gathering on the porches and lawns, grooving to the tunes coming from Ronnie Bergman's house at 512 West Mifflin Street. That's when the police department's number 2 man, Herman Thomas, and a few officers respond to a purported noise complaint. It does not go well. The music plays on, kids edge off the sidewalk into the street. Thomas goes and gets 8 more men, this time in riot gear. We're going down there to crack some skulls, he tells them, and he returns to the scene about 4:15. He orders the crowd to clear the street and is met with vulgar catcalls, a few rocks, and a roasted pig's head on a stick. Baton-wielding police start pushing into the crowd and making a few arrests, including Alderman Paul Soglin, whom they pull up and out of his 1959 Triumph convertible and arrest for driving on the street they are supposedly there to keep open. Soon, 30 officers in riot gear are in the street, and about 500 youth are on porches and roofs, and a handful are hurling rocks and bottles. When Thomas fully unleashes his men, they charge into the crowd with riot masks on and nightsticks up and are met with a hail of rocks and bricks. Thomas fires some tear gas and withdraws and calls in the 100 county and university officials and officers standing by. For the next several hours, small affinity groups engage in hit-and-run battles with police, often in coordinated attacks and ambushes. County deputies pump out massive amounts of tear gas, and a toxic cloud settles over the Three Flats. The crowd blocks Bassett Street with burning barricades. Cops knock them down, they're set back up. Finally, an uneasy calm settles over the neighborhood around midnight. It does not last. Sunday, as hundreds of youth congregate and an equal number of officers approach, Mayor Dyke again refuses to grant a temporary street permit and threatens to use his new power to declare a street clearing curfew. That afternoon, Alderman Soglin is arrested a second time for unlawful assembly while standing by himself near his Bassett Street apartment. When jailers won't take Alderwoman Alicia Ashman's check for his $507 bail, Fire Captain Ed Durkin, president of Firefighters Local 311, authorizes the use of union funds. The police department and the Police and Fire Commission are not amused, especially since Soglin was one of the few aldermen to support Ed Durkin when he took Local 311 out on an illegal strike just a few months before. And if everyone wonders what the distinguishing factor about Madison is, it's this. We had a fire captain and a union leader in the 1960s in Ed Durkin who took the union out on 2 illegal strikes. What did we do to him? We made him chief. That's what you need to know about Madison, Wisconsin. Alderman Eugene Parks, elected in April as the city's first African-American alderman, is also arrested for not leaving when police tell him to. If you know Gene Parks, he doesn't do what police tell him to do. A jury finds Alderman Parks innocent, but the council breaks with its usual practice and refuses to pay his legal fees, which his attorney Dick Cates then waives. Soglin is convicted of failing to obey a lawful command from a police officer and pays a small fine. The unlawful assembly charge against Soglin and 20 others are dropped because Inspector Thomas broke the law when he declared an entire 6-block area an unlawful assembly. After dark, the riot resumes as kids and cops battle throughout downtown. Late Sunday night, some Mifflanders come to the City-County building where the City Council is holding an informal meeting in the vain hope of meeting with Mayor Dyke. But a horde of high school kids and other townies beat them up, while sheriff deputies turn their backs and do not intervene. After last night, Sheriff Leslie says, they deserve everything they get. Early Monday evening, Mayor Dyke comes to Ground Zero, speaking to a jeering crowd of about 1,000 from the steps of the New Mifflin Co-op, which you see still has its old white front grocery sign. He rejects Soglin's demand for amnesty and tells the people they have half an hour to depart. They build new barricades instead. And soon after Dyke leaves, 400 officers from several jurisdictions resume their tear gas offensive, and the third night riot is on. The Monday night riot is the worst yet. Tear gas blankets the area, with rocks thrown and trash fires set from the fraternities to the southeast dorms. Police fire tear gas at girls giving first aid in front of the Hillel Foundation. They fire tear gas into a group of professors on the porch at the University Club. Students studying for finals have to leave the Memorial Library because tear gas is coming up into the building. Police finally exhaust their supply of tear gas canisters and start throwing empty soda cans at students to try and get them to disperse. And the students are fighting back, and not just with projectiles, but by firebombing 3 city, state, and university offices. For the second May in 3 years, student chaos in downtown streets shuts down the city bus service. And the city buses are driven by Teamsters. So the protest movement has scared away football players and Teamsters. Tuesday morning, there are shattered storefronts up and down State Street. 86 people have been treated for injuries. The Student Senate puts $1,900 into a bail fund for the 100 or so arrestees. The city and county have spent about $80,000 for overtime and emergency costs. And Madison has again made its mark with the first lifestyle riot of the era. This is 3 weeks before Stonewall. On Tuesday, a citizens group called the Committee of 30 gets Dyke to withdraw the police so their volunteers can go into the neighborhood to interview the kids to find out not just what happened, but why. And the group is organized and led by a young attorney with the La Follette Sinekin firm. Shirley S. Abrahamson, with help from businessman philanthropist Lowell Fauci and the Reverend Max Gabler. Dozens of volunteers spend 3 days hearing about mean cops and bad landlords. And the committee tells Dyke, and he orders a comprehensive inspection of all 140 buildings in the core Mifflin area. 221 citations for building and sanitary code later, Dyke declares there is considerable legitimacy to the tenant complaints. Now, while there's peace in the streets, there is no peace in the suites at City Hall. Soglin pleads for a 4-hour block party permit for Saturday, and even though Mayor Dyke now supports the request and praises Soglin for, quote, his desperate and significant attempt to bring peace, the council denies the permit 17-3. These people have shown a lack of respect for anything honest and decent, Eastside Alderman Ralph Hornbeck says. They've also shown they plan to have a party whether or not they have a permit. And the threatened showdown is averted only when Ed Durkin, who is popular with students even before he bailed Soglin out, invites everyone to his large spread on the west side. Dyke provides 2 city buses free of charge, the Mifflin Co-op gives the beer, and about 400 Mifflanders have a pretty good party and pig roast. And the national media take note. Campus riots in many parts of the country have given some people the idea there are too many radicals, CBS newsman Murray Fromson reports. But perhaps in fairness, it should be said there are too few Ed Durkins. In June, Mayor Dyke appoints a 3-man panel to investigate why and how things got so out of hand. Their report blames both sides and pleases neither. Now, among its findings, that Police Chief Emery's policy of responding with overwhelming force before it's needed actually helped provoke the riot. The committee finds that the police did not use tear gas, quote, until they had been pelted with missiles, but faults Emery and Thomas for the initial response. Quote, the second additional precipitating factor was the bringing of police attired in riot gear to Mifflin Street before there had been any actual violence. Police show up in riot gear. The kids go, hey, you want a riot? Okay, we'll give you a riot. Once the violence began, the report continues, training proved inadequate in the case of a certain few officers who during the disorders engaged in beatings, improper use of riot sticks, and indiscriminate and improper use of tear gas. More and better training in this field is needed. Stores along State Street with shattered windows and lost inventory filed claims for $8,000 under a state law making cities responsible for damages during riots. The day after Christmas, the city denies all claims. Now, this was a time when the Badger football team had gone 0-19-1 over the past 2 years. And the Wisconsin State Journal columnist Roundy Coughlin had a unique perspective on the first 2 nights of riots. If the football team could get a march on like a lot of the students did Sunday night, they would go to the Rose Bowl. And a few days later, a sibling city's underground press pays respect on its front page, and this is just 100 miles north of the Rose Bowl Stadium itself. On Wisconsin, the Berkeley Barb declares. So those are the highlights of 1969. I'm going to take a few minutes now and step back and give you the big picture and the 5 issues that dominated the decade. At one time or another, each of these issues was the most important issue in city politics and government, and often had a direct and overwhelming impact on city elections. Law Park, landfill on the shores of Lake Monona, here being used as a waterfront parking lot. And as the decade opens, the most politically significant issue was building or blocking Monona Terrace, the civic auditorium and convention center Frank Lloyd Wright designed for this location. It was the big issue in 1960 and loomed so large in 1961 that Henry Reynolds ran for mayor, that it was the main reason that Henry Reynolds ran for mayor, and killing it was the main issue in a referendum in 1962. It was the dominant issue for those 3 years. This is Frank Lloyd Wright's last iteration, finished 7 weeks before his death. The project was approved by referendum in 1954, contracted for in 1956, killed by state legislation in 1957, revived by state legislation in 1959, put out to bid in 1961. That's how close we came to building it. We put it out to bid in 1961 and was abandoned by referendum a year later. Henry Reynolds and the other conservative businessmen who fought Monona Terrace figured if they delayed it long enough through litigation and legislation, inflation alone would make it too expensive and it would be abandoned. And they were right. Now, it is heresy to say, but I think in a way those who fought Monona Terrace did us a favor, because it had the same size theaters and art gallery as the Overture Center for the Arts. If we had built this, I think it is highly unlikely that Jerry Fauci would have given us another $205 million to replace it, which would have been too bad because Overture is such a much better building, and the Monona Terrace is in such a poor location for a performing arts center. There just aren't enough bars and restaurants, and it's got lousy mass transit. And even as a convention center, it would have failed because it only has 45% of the convention space in the Monona Terrace that we finally did build. And obviously there would be no way to expand from Wright's design. There was another effort in the late 60s by Wright's son-in-law, William Wesley Peters. It was not as politicized, but it met the same fate. The construction budget did not satisfy the construction drawings, and the project was abandoned. And this would have been just phase 1 of Monona Basin, a staggering statement of architectural ambition. 3 miles from Olin Park to Law Park, this would have been John Nolan's Grand Esplanade on steroids. These plans are as far as it got. The next dominant issue was urban renewal, especially what city staff and the Madison Redevelopment Authority did to the eastern tip of the Greenbush addition. The Bush was a 60-year-old neighborhood that was international, intergenerational, interreligious, and interracial, but unfortunately had inadequate infrastructure. So the MRA turned this into this, the Triangle Urban Renewal Area. It is to Madison's shame that we knowingly destroyed this important community without a second thought. It is further insulting to see how poorly the program was planned and executed, and especially how it failed to provide timely, affordable replacement housing. But I do not think the motive was malevolent. I do not think its purpose was to break up the neighborhood. The city didn't care about the neighborhood. The city only cared about streets and sewers and building codes and the highest use of land. The community was not the target, but yes, it was collateral damage, and the city was okay with that. Urban renewal was a major issue when Mayor Reynolds won re-election in 1963 and was on the ballot itself in 1964 when it barely survived a referendum to end urban renewal and abolish the Redevelopment Authority. Reynolds, both newspapers, and the entire political and business elite opposed that referendum, and it failed by only 367 votes out of 37,000 cast. Think how angry people must have been at urban renewal to have come that close to rejecting years and years of future federal aid. But wait till you hear the kicker. Now, the hardest part about urban renewal in 62 and 63 was finding replacement housing for the displaced black households. With no law at any level against housing discrimination, non-whites here had access to 27% of the rental units in the city and 10% of the housing for sale. Housing discrimination was so universal, it was reflected on the federal forms. Of almost 19,000 housing units in the city of Madison, non-whites had access to 3,500. That's less than 19%. That is why, as the decade opened, 76% of Madison non-whites lived in just 4 census tracts, and 8 aldermanic wards had no non-whites at all. So the civil rights movement was a big issue throughout the decade, and it was a very big deal in December 1963 when Mayor Reynolds, a conservative white businessman, cast the tie-breaking vote to enact the first law or ordinance in the state of Wisconsin to ban housing discrimination. And the principal drafter of that historical ordinance was that young attorney whom we've already met. Another indication that Madison in the 60s really was a special place. A figure of statewide historical significance, the first female justice of the Supreme Court, the first female Chief Justice, was a leading member of the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights and wrote the ordinance creating the Equal Opportunities Commission. And Shirley Abrahamson was not the only future Supreme Court Chief Justice to play an important role in local politics. Here's Raleigh Day, chairman of the Madison Housing Authority, which tried to build public housing for the people displaced by the Redevelopment Authority at the dedication of the Triangle's Gay Braxton Apartments, Madison's first public housing since veterans housing in 1949. That's Raleigh under the arrow next to Mayor Otto Fesky. The good news is that all those tenants were from the old Greenbush edition. The bad news is that their houses had been torn down in 1962 and 63, and the grand opening was June 1965. The University of Wisconsin was the 4th great issue throughout the decade because it is the critical component that makes Madison Madison, and not just when protests spill out into the streets. Economically, intellectually, emotionally, socially, culturally, the university is central to our identity. And in the 60s, the university had a profound impact on downtown planning and development. Thanks to massive amounts of federal funds and a president in Fred Harvey Harrington who proudly proclaimed himself the biggest imperialist since Teddy Roosevelt, the university turned this into this and created such a backlash that it was the cause of the referendum to end urban renewal and abolish the Redevelopment Authority, not the Triangle. The Triangle residents had very little political and economic capital. They couldn't fight back. But the property owners around the Southeast Dorm expansion area had political capital, and they could fight back. And they are the ones who almost ended urban renewal. So what's really important about university expansionism is that that's what caused the decade's first rift between town and gown, not student protests. The 1964 referendum to end urban renewal and abolish the redevelopment authority was 18 months before any student protest generated appreciable backlash. Harrington and the regents are to blame for the decade's first community hostility toward the campus, not the students. It was the adults, not the kids. Of course, radicals and revolutionaries did cause serious problems for the university and themselves, most especially on October 27, 1966, at the Stock Pavilion, when Senator Edward Kennedy headlines a campaign appearance for Governor Pat Lucey. And a dozen or so leaders from the Committee to End the War in Vietnam heckle him so aggressively that Kennedy gives up and leaves the stage. 8,000 students sign a letter of apology for what a handful have done. But there's more than just a symbolic public relations backlash. There is a substantive reaction by the university with profound implications. Because it was the heckling of Senator Kennedy that caused the faculty to adopt the rule against obstructing university activities. They actually called it the Kennedy Rule. This was the rule protesters knowingly violated when they blocked the hallways of the Commerce Building in October 1967 to block the Dow Chemical Company from conducting job interviews because they made napalm for use in Vietnam. It was to remove the students from the building, to enforce the Kennedy Rule that Chancellor William Sewell called in the Madison Police Department. As you may have heard, that also did not go well. The Battle of Dow radicalized thousands of students. It made the community curious about the anti-war movement, and it made a star out of Paul Soglin, who you see under the red arrow, about to be beaten. Madison police officers wail on the obstructors for 13 minutes, sending 52 to the emergency room, most of them with scalp lacerations that bleed profusely but are not really serious injuries. But then on the plaza outside, a different dynamic. It's class break, and suddenly a crowd of several thousand, and many are fighting back, some with rocks and bottles. The police are under siege. Several officers are severely injured. Emory finally calls for tear gas, its first use anywhere to quell an on-campus protest. This is the moment when Police Chief Emory vows he will never be outnumbered again, that he will respond at all future demonstrations with overwhelming force, even before such force is necessary. This is the birth of the policy put into place on Mifflin Street on May 3rd, 1969. The cops helped spur a riot on Mifflin Street because they showed up in riot gear. They were in riot gear because they had bricks and rocks thrown at them at Dow. They were at Dow to enforce the Kennedy Rule against obstruction. An event in 1966 creates the conditions for an event in 1967 that helps produce an event in 1969. The spirit moves through time and leaves us with history. And finally, bringing it all full circle, the 60s ends with the deaths of two stellar citizens who fought each other for years over Frank Lloyd Wright and Monona Terrace. Joseph W. Bud Jackson, 90, indefatigable advocate for Madison improvements and implacable foe of Frank Lloyd Wright and Monona Terrace. Colonel Jackson organized the Army's last mounted cavalry unit under General Jack Black Pershing in World War I, was later business manager for the medical clinic founded by his father, a Civil War surgeon. He left the Jackson Clinic in 1937 to found and lead the Madison and Wisconsin Foundation, the forerunner to our Chamber of Commerce. He raised private funds for the University Arboretum, the Madison School Forest, and 18 city parks, helped get public funds for the airport, VA hospital, and city-county building, and helped kill Monona Terrace. And economics professor emeritus Harold Groves, 72, a founder of the modern cooperative movement, the intellectual and political father of Wisconsin's first in the nation Unemployment Compensation Act, and an important supporter of Frank Lloyd Wright. One of 6 children of a Lodi farm couple, Groves earned 3 degrees at Wisconsin, took his doctorate in 1927 under the legendary John R. Commons, whose endowed chair he would later hold. served in the Assembly and Senate in the 30s. He was the chief faculty sponsor and patron of the interracial, interreligious women's cooperative Groves House. He and his wife Helen were friends of Frank Lloyd Wright since the 30s and leaders of Citizens for Monona Terrace. Groves served 6 years on the auditorium committee until he was replaced by Mayor Henry Reynolds after that momentous election of 1961. May their memories be for a blessing. That concludes my talk. Thank you very much for your kind attention.